Hi there. To change the turbocharger on a Vauxhall Vivaro, you're going to need a socket set with an extender bar. You're going to need a jack, axle stands, a flathead screwdriver, a 13mm socket, 17mm, and 10mm. This could vary if your turbo's been changed before, because sometimes they change the nut size. The turbo is located at the back of the engine and can be accessed from the bonnet or from underneath the van. First of all, you want to take out the air filter and take out the fan box which controls the fans inside the cabin. This is optional, but you can also take out the trim just above the bumper. It is worth taking out the intercooler to have a look to make sure it's not filled with oil. If it is filled with oil, that needs a clean. I would recommend taking off all the pipes to check for oil and clean them. Once you remove these parts, you'll be able to see the turbo, as you can see pictured here. The next step is to remove the outlet from the turbo, which leads to the catalyst converter. There are 4 nuts to unscrew and they should be 13mm each. I recommend you just loosen them for now, because there's work to be done underneath before this comes off. Use a torch to help you, and you can reach 3 of the 4 of the bolts and nuts from the top. Use an extension bar if you need to, and also an impact driver will help to stop preventing snapping the bolts. Don't panic if the studs come out, because you can either screw them back in or replace them for £10 off Amazon or eBay. Use a lot of WD-40 and be patient. Once you've loosened 3 of the 4 nuts, which are 13mm from the top, you can get under the bottom just by the driver's wheel, and you can get up under there and you can undo the last nut, but don't take it off, just loosen them for now. Next, you need to get back under the bonnet and remove the oil inlet, which is a 17mm spanner. You may want to cut your spanner in half like I did, so that you can get better access to turning it. Otherwise you'll only be turning it small amounts, like quarter of a turn. So if you can get a spanner in there, you can at least do half a turn at a time and remove the oil inlet. Starting from the exhaust, you want to undo the 2 nuts. They're normally 10mm, but they may be different if it's been done before. So you want to take them both off and just move the exhaust pipe to the left or to the right, out of the way. There's a large bolt on the gearbox that's holding a oil pipe. You need to undo that so you can access the catalyst converter. You will see a metal bracket that supports the catalyst converter, and there's 2 nuts in that. They should be 14mm or 13mm, depending if it's been worked on before and they've changed the bolts. Take them out. The next step is to take off the 4 nuts that you've loosened and then slide off the catalyst converter. Once that's out of the way, you'll then have access to the oil outlet, which requires an extension bar for your ratchet or impact driver, and you're going to need to undo 2 10mm nuts. Once they're off, I would recommend get rid of all the gaskets and replace them with new ones for every part of the turbo. If you now go back to under the bonnet in the engine bay, you'll now see that the turbo is exposed. There'll be 3 further nuts that are 13mm. You need to undo all 3 of them. Ensure that the tubes and pipes are all removed, and then remove the turbo. If there is unusual play in a turbine, that means it's broken. If it's been making a whistling noise, I believe that's a turbine rubbing on the metal because it's off axis. I recommend getting the turbo serviced or repaired, as it's cheaper than buying a new one. If you buy one new, it'll come with gaskets. If you get yours reconditioned, ask the person that reconditions it for the new gaskets, or you can buy a kit on eBay for about 30 quid. This can be done in your driveway. I've never even driven this van yet. I've never even driven a van. I've just bought this with a broken turbo. I used a guide from Facebook, and I couldn't really find a decent video on YouTube, so I've tried to make one myself. I hope this is helpful. You don't need to remove any engine bay mount parts or anything to do this. Some people do to get ease of access. I also heard about removing the drive shaft off, but you don't need to do that. You just need to be clever with where you position your ratchet. Just have a look. There's different ways you can get round certain parts to fit your ratchet in using your arm. If I can do this, anyone can. So obviously it's the same process in reverse to put the turbo back together. Just ensure that you do the nuts and bolts up tight enough not to snap, but tight enough not to leak. Also, make sure that your tubes go back on, and don't just put them on. Remember, you need to tighten them as well. Here you can see the play in my turbo. That means it's broken. In this case, I had a serious oil leak everywhere in the engine bay. There was oil pretty much in every tube. There was oil all over the engine. There was oil in the intercooler, so I had to clean all that. There's also oil in my exhaust, which needs to be dealt with next. So on the rebuild, you want to put the turbo back onto the engine. Before you mount the outlet of the emissions, you want to make sure that you properly install with the new gasket the oil outlet. Please ensure that they're tight, because I had a massive leak twice from not tightening them up. This is a small leak. Before it was gushing out. Once your oil inlet and your oil outlet are securely on, you then want to fit the emission outlet which goes to your catalyst converter. So you want to make sure that your gasket is on there as well, which can be quite tricky. So what I suggest is, if your studs have come out, try and get the nuts off or use new ones. Put one stud in the bottom left and one in the top right, and then you can easily line up your gasket. You can then place your other two studs. Then place your metal outlet for the catalyst converter onto the turbo. You can just put two studs on, line it up, and then put the other studs through if you find that easier. Make sure they're tight, and then put the 4 nuts on and just tighten it up loosely. You want to tighten it up loosely because you want to make sure that the bracket underneath lines up. So you want to get underneath and you want to tighten the 2 nuts in to support the catalyst converter from the bottom. Make sure that the pipe is back onto the gearbox. You then have the exhaust to put back on, which is 2 nuts. You can use a new gasket, preferably. If not, just give the other one a good clean. Use lots of patience and lots of WD-40. Just go slow with the turning of the nuts and bolts so you don't snap anything. You can just crank this up with the jack from the driver's side. I used 3 axle stands because I was working alone and I didn't want this thing to fall on top of me. If you want better access, you can lift up the other side as well. You can also strip out all the front, and you can take out the plastic support bracket that lays just above the bumper. It is quite tricky, but it does come out. That's really helpful for ease of access. It's a good idea to work out why your turbo failed. If it's something a bit strange, there's a guide on YouTube. Have a look around and you can find a diagnostic to work out how your turbo went and why it went, because you don't want to replace it and then 6 months to a year later it's failed because of the same problem. When you fit a new turbo, it's crucial to change the oil for new oil. Change the oil filter, the air filter and the fuel filter so that all fresh air is guaranteed to be going into your new turbo. You don't want dirty air and dirty oil going into your new turbo. And the pro tip here is to clean your hands using WD-40. Spray it on your hands, give them a rub, and then use a cloth and some warm water to remove the oil from your hands. Make sure you moisturise your hands after, and make sure you give them a good clean with soap. Get a gasket set like this one for all your gaskets. Also remember to clean any areas where gaskets are going to make sure they're free from dirt and oil. You don't want any dirt or oil going into your turbo in unnecessary areas. Once your turbo is all back together, you want to run the engine for about 10 minutes on idle and just check, let it warm up and check for any leaks. And don't worry if you have got a leak. Leaks are quite common. Just address the issue and you'll sort it. It may mean taking it all apart again, but at least you won't have to take the turbo off. You'll just need to get to the leaking area, which will normally be the oil inlet or the oil outlet. I hope you find this video helpful. Please feel free to comment for any questions. And good luck with your turbo. Thank you. Please like this video, comment and subscribe. Thank you very much.